Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic Goblin noise!
Hey gang, and welcome back. Just so you know, you can use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, one word, at flipsidegaming.com to get 10% off orders $10 or more. You can also use the promo code at Original Magic Art on everything except for paintings. And finally, you can use the code at mtg.multizone.ca to get 10% off of your orders of singles. Using the code will help you save some money and help out the channel at the same time. Just to let you know, Flipside Gaming is going to be giving away a full set of Commander 2019 when it releases to one lucky winner. The contest will be running from July 12th until August 26th, and all you have to do to enter is either use my promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, no spaces, on an order of over $10 or more, or you can send a stamped, self-addressed envelope or postcard to Flipside Gaming. It's one entry per person, so good luck, have fun, and I hope you win. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game takes place at Gamebreakers, and once again, the Madman Martin is bringing a new deck to the channel. He's got Nikya, keeping a Molten Hydra, a Genesis Hydra, a Vivid Crag, 2 Mountains, Mina and Den, and a Sylvan Safekeeper. Max has built Kethis, keeping a Krosan Verge, Isolated Chapel, Growing Rites of Itlamok, Thalia, Heretic Cathar, Path to Exile, Emrakul the Promised End, and Weatherlight. Ben, who's new to the channel, is bringing the Mimeoplasm, and he keeps a Nezumi Graverobber, Vivid Marsh, Ingaruk's Wake, Breeding Pool, Terramorphic Expanse, Torment of Hailfire, and Solemn Simulacrum. Last but certainly not least, we have Nick bringing Mowu, the bestest of boys, and he keeps 4 Forests, Zendikar Resurgent, Ancient Animus, and Cathedral of War. Ben wins the die roll and starts us off. Ben plays a Breeding Pool, having it come in tapped. Nick plays his tap Cathedral of War and passes to Martin. Martin plays his Vivid Crag, which comes in tapped as well, and passes. Keeping with the tap lands, we see a Krosan Verge from Max as he passes. Ben plays a Vivid Marsh tapped, that comes in with 2 charge counters on it, and he passes to Nick. Nick drops a Forest and casts Soul Ring. Martin plays a Mountain, and we see a Molten Hydra before he passes to Max. Max plays a Snow-Covered Plains, and passes. Ben pays 2 for Coiling Oracle, revealing a Dreamborn Muse off the top, and puts it to hand. He plays a Terramorphic Expanse, and passes. Nick plays a Forest, and brings out Mowu before passing. Martin plays a Mountain, and removes a counter from his Crag to help pay for Ronus. The god resolves, and he passes to Max. Max plays his Isolated Chapel, and passes. Ben cracks the Expanse at the end of turn, and goes to find a basic Forest. On his turn, Ben plays a Jungle Hollow, gaining 1 life as it comes in. He then casts Nezumi Graverobber, and passes to Nick. Nick plays a Forest, and casts Rishkar in his main phase, putting a counter on Mowu, which gets another one because of Mowu's ability, and on Rishkar. Heading to combat, Mowu hits Ben, who lets the damage go through, dropping his life by a total of 6. Martin draws, and removes the final counter from his Crag to help cast Managorger Hydra. Heading to combat, the Molten Hydra heads at Max, and Max takes 1. Max decides to also crack his Verge to go and find 2 lands. He grabs Murmuring Bosk and a Godless Shrine for his Forest and his Plain cards respectively. Max draws for turn and casts Kethis, which triggers the Managorger Hydra. He then casts a Mox Amber, which gets the Hydra another trigger. We then see a Growing Rites of Itlamok, triggering the Hydra for the 3rd time this turn. Max decides to keep Hermit Druid, and passes. At the end of turn, Nick uses Ancient Animus, triggering the Hydra and targeting Mowu and giving the best boy a +1/+1 counter and then another from Mowu's ability, and he then has Mowu devour the Nezumi Graverobber. Ben sadly has no land to play, but he does cast a Solemn Simulacrum to go and find a basic. This gives the Hydra another +1/+1 counter, and Ben then passes after finding an island. Nick plays a Forest and casts Sword of Sinew and Steel, triggering the Hydra. He puts the sword onto Mowu and hits Max for 10. With Mowu connecting, the sword triggers and blows up Max's Mox Amber. Nick then plays an Aquastrand Spider, which gives the Hydra another trigger, and he passes to Martin. Martin plays a mountain, reminding us that he's playing mono red in a Gruul deck, and rather than continue to pick on Max, he swings the Hydra at Ben for 8. Ben decides to take the hit, and Martin passes. Max draws and drops the fairest green creature in all of Magic, the Hermit Druid. He then passes while Martin adds his counter to the Hydra. Ben pays 3 in his main phase for Buried Alive. He goes and finds up to 3 creatures to put into his graveyard, and puts only a Doomgape and a Simic Sky Swallower there. He then passes to Nick. Nick casts Zendikar Resurgent in his main phase, giving Martin's Hydra yet another +1/+1 counter. Moving to combat, Mowu heads at Ben, who this time blocks with a Solemn. Ben still takes 8 commander damage, but at least gets to draw when Solemn dies. At the end of turn, Martin puts a counter onto his Molten Hydra. Martin draws and swings the Mana Gorger Hydra at Max. Max doesn't want to take the hit and uses Gideon's spellbook version of Path to Exile to get rid of the Hydra. This lets Martin go and find a basic, and surprisingly he finds a forest instead of a mountain. How strange. He then passes. Max draws for turn and activates the Hermit Druid in his main phase. For someone who claims he has 9 or so basics in his deck, he goes really deep into his library. Max then exiles 2 legendaries to Kethis' ability, and he plays a Gyre Reach Sanitarium as a land for turn from the yard. He then brings out Drana, followed by Thalia Heretic Cathar. Max then passes through his phases, and before leaving his second main phase, Martin pings the Druid with his Molten Hydra to prevent the Growing Rites from flipping. Ben casts the Mimeoplasm in his main phase, who sadly enters tapped. He exiles the Simic Sky Swallower, having Mimeoplasm become a copy of it, and exiles the Doomgape to give the Mimeoplasm 10 +1/+1 counters. This is big, but with so much commander damage from Mowu, will it help Ben in the long run? Nick draws and wonders what to do. He's spread out his commander damage quite a bit, and he's worried about the swingbacks, so he decides to finish off Ben. In his second main phase, Nick then plays a forest, and sadly Ben reveals that his hand is mostly 7 and 8 drops, so he wasn't going to be doing much of anything for the next few turns. Martin draws and casts Nikya, while Max realizes he should have recast his Mox Amber the turn before. Oops. Max plays a snow-covered Swamp for his land for turn, and exiles 2 more legendary permanents to Kethis. He recasts the Mox Amber from his graveyard, and counting up his permanent types, is able to cast Emrakul the Promised End for only 7 mana. With her on-cast trigger, Max decides to take Nick's next turn. She then resolves. Heading to combat, Max swings Drana at Martin for 2, and once she connects, puts a +1/+1 counter onto all of Max's attacking creatures, i.e. just Drana. Max then moves to his end step, and he gets to transform the Growing Rites to reveal Itlimoc, Cradle of the Sun. Max starts Nick's turn by heading to combat, and he swings Mowu at Martin and Rishkar and the Aquastrand Spider at himself. Martin blocks with Ronus, taking 4 commander damage, and Max blocks the 2 creatures with his bigger ones. Max still gets to control the sword trigger as it resolves, and he has it blow up the sword itself, while Mowu heads to the command zone because of Ronus' Death Touch. Max then casts Nick's Swiftfoot Boots from his hand, and he passes, moving to Nick's extra turn. Nick draws and recasts Mowu, drawing as he casts from the Resurgent trigger. Mowu still comes in tap though, and Nick plays a forest before moving the boots onto his commander, and passes to Martin. Martin heads to combat, swinging Nikya at Max. Max blocks with Emrakul, and Martin's commander heads to the command zone. In his second main phase, Martin's now able to cast Blasphemous Act, and he puts it onto the stack. This will wipe the board, but before it does, Martin puts another counter onto his Molten Hydra, and then taps it, removing the 2 counters to deal 2 damage to Max. Max plays an Okina, Temple to the Grandfathers, as his land for turn, and he casts Tashar in his main phase. He's then able to cast Weatherlight, which in turn triggers Tashar, allowing Max to bring back Thalia. He then passes. Nick plays another forest, and the flood is real, or should I say overgrowth is real. Nick then casts a Ravenous Slime, drawing as it enters tapped. He then moves the boots over, and he casts Explosive Vegetation to hopefully help have him not draw any more forests. Nick then casts a Reclamation Sage, drawing as he casts it, and blowing up the Weatherlight as it enters. We then see Nick recast his commander, drawing again before it enters, and passing. Martin's hoping for a land, but doesn't get there. He needs to cast a tap Mina and Den though, but desperately needs more green. Nick suggests to Martin to bounce the Vivid Crag back to his hand to get the charge counters back on it as it re-enters, and Martin is in such a state that he actually starts to consider doing so. Max plays a snow-covered forest and goes to combat. He swings Thalia at Nick and Tashar at Martin. Thalia is actually a secret Ink Eyes in disguise, and Max gets to steal Rishkar from Nick's graveyard, putting a +1/+1 counter onto Rishkar and Tashar. Max then recasts Thalia, who triggers Tashar and brings back Drana, and with nothing else, Max passes. Nick plays a Forge of Heroes and looks at Max's side of the board. Nick then swings Mowu at Max, who blocks with his first strikers and puts Mowu back on his leash in the command zone. Nick is able to easily recast Mowu though, and draws from doing so thanks to the Resurgent trigger. Nick then casts an Oracle of Moldiah, drawing first from the Resurgent trigger, and then reveals the top card of his library. He plays a Forest as his second land for turn, and he casts Increasing Savagery on Mowu, giving the pupper 5 +1/+1 counters, and then an extra one from Mowu's ability. Nick then also taps the Forge to give Mowu another +1/+1 counter, and Mowu gives himself another one because he's such a good boy. Nick then passes. Martin draws a seemingly decent out to his land problems, casting his own Oracle of Moldiah. He reveals not a land off the top, and actually wishes he'd bounced the Vivid back to his hand now, yikes. Max recasts Kethis in his main phase, exiling 2 legendary permanents to use his ability. He then casts Emrakul again, and Miri. Max resolves Emrakul's trigger, and he decides to take Nick's next turn. We then see a Vivian hitting the stack, who returns Azusa from Max's yard. He then upticks the Walker, and keeps the card set aside. Moving to combat, Drana and Tashar hit at Martin, while Thalia, Ink Eyes, and Rishkar go at Nick. Nick blocks Ink Eyes with his Rex Sage, and first strike damage then happens, with Drana dealing 2, and her ability triggers, giving all of Max's creatures a +1/+1 counter. Normal damage is then applied, with Martin and Nick both taking 4. Nick untaps and gives his cards over to Max for his next turn. Max then casts a Bane of Progress, who draws him a card and then blows up all the artifacts and enchantments on the field. And the Bane gains 4 +1/+1 counters. Moving to combat, he swings Mowu at himself being Max that is, and he blocks the pupper with Emrakul. With nothing else, Max passes. Nick draws and plays a Nykthos off the top, and then a Forest from hand. He then casts a Force Mage Advocate, and activates Nykthos for 5 green, and actually does have enough to cast Mowu again. Nick then taps the Forge again to put counters onto Mowu, and he passes to Martin. Martin draws, and reveals a card that cares about lands, but not actually a land itself. He activates Mina and Den, returning the Crag to his hand, and replays it, which has it come in with 2 new charge counters. Martin then has to discard, and passes. Max taps his Itlimoc for 10 green mana, and we see Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger hitting the stack. He exiles Mina and Den, plus Mowu with his on-cast trigger. Max then swings Drana, Tashar, Emrakul, Kethis, Reki, and Miri at Nick, and the rest at Martin. Nick blocks Reki, and before damage is dealt, Max flashes in Mikaeus the Unhallowed. This is, plus Drana's ability, is enough to take Nick out, and with being so far behind on lands, Martin concedes to Max. Game review time. So, right off the bat, I think Nick had the right idea, focusing fire on 1 or 2 players, and knocking them out before focusing on the last one. Hindsight is 20/20, and he probably would have been better off taking out Max instead of Ben, as the swingback from Ben was almost certainly less powerful than anything Max did his subsequent turn. I think Max was even surprised with how deep his Hermit Druid activation went, and his graveyard was instantly filled with tons of goodies for him to manipulate. Emrakul the Promised End is one of those cards that when it resolves, it certainly changes the face of the game. Taking Nick's next turn and forcing him to attack into bad blocks was always a great move, and using the Sword of Sinew and Steel's trigger to blow itself up was particularly genius. I wish I had more to say about Ben's deck, but unfortunately we didn't get to see very much of it since he died so early on. I also feel like Martin's deck wasn't really able to shine in this game, since Nikya was out and prevented him from casting very much, and the turn after he'd cast her, he needed her to die so he could use a board wipe anyway. He was also completely hosed on green mana sources, and having to bounce a tap land back to your hand only to replay it and not even have access to that green mana until your next turn is way too slow for this game. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.